Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Full Tilt Podcast. And today I'm super excited to welcome Tricia Benn, who I know very well, but a lot of you people out there also know her. She's the current CEO of the C-Suite Network in the US, who we've worked with extensively over the last year or two now. So really
Mhm.
great to see you again and say hi and talk to you a little bit about things that most people don't know about you today.
Well, that could go in a lot of different directions, but I'm so thrilled to be here with you, Belinda.
Well, I'm always happy to talk to you. You're one of the sweetest people I know and one of the most interesting, which leads me to the first couple of questions because I found this out when I was researching about your background and I was gobsmacked, apart from the ice skating piece. But these other pieces are really extraordinary, but not a surprise when I've sort of worked through them. But you've had an amazing career and you've really had, from what I've seen, what looks like more than one career. It's almost like you've had multiple ones sort of stitched together. So you've had corporate careers, you've had sporting careers, your education went off, sort of all started in a completely different area, but funnily enough leads you back to where you are here. So just sort of talk to us about that young girl, young woman that first walked into the world and then sort of started thinking about what she wanted to do. Like, what was driving you to make the decisions you've made in your early career?
Belinda, it's so interesting. As you said, stitch. All I could think of is all the wounds we all have right through life, and that's all sort of stitched up, and you're learning from those
That's
as
so
you
true.
you share them, right? Like,
Right.
but yes, my goodness, it does feel like I've had a lot of different lifetimes. If I were to choose one thread, and I'll share a little bit about some of the things you alluded to.
Please do.
If I was to share, the one stitch that I think goes through it all is that I am outrageously mission driven. I want to be able to see something really move. And so when I grab hold of a mission that I think matters and I'm with people that are committed to that mission, there's nothing in the world more motivating to me. So I frequently say I grew up on a farm with very young parents. And so I learned, one thing that you absolutely have to learn if you grew up on a farm is you're either useful or you're dead. Nice and simple, and it is 1,000% true. And anybody who doesn't believe me, just go and hang out on a farm, a real farm, for a little bit, and you will see you're either useful or you're dead. And you can technically be useful dead, which is kind of how we get to eat and so on. But anyway, that upbringing and that level setting of community really matters. Again, a really important thread through my life. The figure skating. I had the incredible opportunity of training at the Olympic Training Center for Figure Skating in Canada, another sort of lifetime. And my goodness, the discipline, the commitment, the goal alignment, all of those things. Plus, I was a competitive ice dancer, so I had a partner. I couldn't just do it alone. We had all of our coaches, all of our family support, all of the family and community around us that would buy our tickets to go to our shows, and all of those things that we do for young people in our communities. That was just again an incredible experience. And I'll put figure skating up against any sport in terms of its toughness, because the ice never gets softer, boards don't get softer, the blade's pretty sharp, and you're training 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, 50 weeks of the year. So it's, it and mentally very tough. So this is, I think, part of the relentlessness that I demonstrate. So you fell down. In figure skating, you fall and fall and fall till you fall just a little bit less. So those Olympians you see, they're falling every day, all the time. That is what happens, and you get back up and you deliver the best that you can. And whatever that is, that's what it is. You get up the next day and you start over again. And so there's a relentlessness to that as well. And also I will say, I was very much empowered. My mom sat me down every year and said, "This is what this is going to take, and this is what you're going to need to do." I had to get myself up at 4:30 in the morning. I had to make my own lunches, pack my own bags, and I had to have A's in school. And there were criteria,
Right.
and
That's
I signed
great,
up for
though.
it.
That's great because
Yeah,
it builds in that sense of self-reliance that's so important when you go out into the real world, that no one is coming to save you, that you have to do it
right.
for yourself. And I can see that in you. Obviously, I've known you a while, and that's one of the things I admire so much. But you started your education. You did your education at college was in sociology and anthropology, which I only realized when I was doing the research for this podcast that you'd done that. And it made so much sense to me because you're one of the best people, if that makes sense. So in terms of being able to read the room, being able to get a sense of what people need just in conversation, just that sense of relating to the human state, you're so, so good at it. So from all of those different elements, like looking back on like you've said, your skating piece for the resilience and the self-determination, for the education, they all seem to be around, if you like, that human state, like, because they all require discipline, they all require real drive, all of those things. So how did all of that shape the way that you think about leadership and community and what makes people tick now?
Enormously. And you mentioned, Belinda, the degrees in sociology and anthropology. The last thing I thought I would do is go into business.
I
The
bet.
absolute last thing, because to me, and I turned 55 this year. So when I started and went to college, we call university in
Yep.
Canada, um, the examples I had were business is trophy getting and
Yep.
trophy hunting.
Yep.
And I had no interest in being a trophy, and I had no interest in that kind of the sort of plague around business as about greed and selfishness and aggrandizement of the ego. And so my degrees are in sociology and anthropology. The irony is that when I finished those degrees, I'd lived in England in between, so I got a little bit of experience,
Right.
different places. And my realization as soon as I got into business about how powerful actually caring about other people is, aligning on mission and the values. What are the criteria we're going to use to make decisions?
Yep.
And then empowering a team to move forward. Oh my goodness, it's everything. And
Yep.
so my career started out, I did a year data programming, statistical analytics, and then I was recruited to the largest consulting firm in Canada. In fact, it was the second best known brand in the country. And what an incredible experience that was. It was in the burn and churn of consulting. You bring people in, you burn them out, you kick them out. My whole thing was I can bring people on, create an amazing team, more value, charge clients more, have them stay with us longer, and have fulfillment where the team is growing, scaling, and seeing opportunities. So it was immediately so gratifying. And that leadership of everyone on the team,
Yep.
again, not the ego, not I'm the only leader, I'm the
Right.
only one who knows, but empowering everybody to step up with whatever their area of expertise is, what they could own. Just unbelievably rewarding. And it wasn't just it's the right thing or I feel good about it. It was we delivered tangible results that were markedly higher
Right.
than the rest
Right.
or the other.
And for sure, because you've focused, and I think I really do think when we talked about that previously, about the human element being the most important for success. And I know from my experience, I've seen that as well. There's so many people that have great ideas, but you don't have that human component. It nothing's going to happen with it. So
Yeah.
that brings you to C-Suite Network, which is probably one of the best business communities that I've been, able to be a part of. It's been, a really great experience for me. So I know that all of those values that you hold so closely are enmeshed in that. But
Mhm.
the kind of extension, I think, of who you are is the C-Suite Network's mission, which is to build a community based on integrity and transparency and measuring success really beyond that P&L and, the business numbers that we're all have to obviously perform within or build a framework around. But, in a world that's still largely driven by that, how hard has it been for you to really maintain those sort of pillars of importance that the human state is really at the core of it all?
So Belinda, first, it's just been incredible to have you as part of the community. And the community is global. And to have great leaders be able to be connecting globally that would otherwise never have met each other is incredibly rewarding. And I'm so grateful for your leadership in our community. And
Thank you.
Oh, of course. And secondly, the fact of the matter is it's not been difficult at all. In fact, it is the criteria that makes everything else easier. Is it the right thing to do to serve our community? Is it the right thing to do to create the success that we're promised to, our brand promise? And that's something that it actually, when you're galvanized against those values and you share them with a massive community, it it becomes the backbone. It really is the backbone. And again, it's not we're doing we're doing the right thing to say we do the right thing. We're not sitting in judgment of others. It's literally truly, how do we create real meaningful success? And this is critical. You cannot do good without having a sustainable business model to deliver it. So, and this is why I'm a massive believer in our business leaders who are committed to people first values, to see people succeed around them, not just themselves. It's that actually makes the real impact in the world. We're the ones who know how to do this, how to build those kinds of sustainable business models, and so I love the question, Belinda. I don't think I've ever been asked it that
Oh,
way
really?
because, yeah, it makes it, it's not hard to keep it. It actually makes everything else easier. It galvanizes.
Right. It certainly does. I mean, I think also it's a hard one for people to get their head around, even in their own business, because, and it's true, the more people you have, the harder the role is because, people are not, cookie cutter, right? They're different. They have different challenges. They come to the office with different perspectives. And in a lot of ways, that can be difficult to manage. But I know from experience, without obviously the right mix of people, you can't pull anything together. An idea is limited by the space in an individual's head. So if it's just one person working on their own, they're not going to get very far. So you've had a really interesting sort of corporate career. I want to talk about that for a minute because
Mhm.
we've talked about this too, and we know that within corporate environments, you learn so much because there's a lot of discipline, there's a lot of framework around process in most successful organizations, right? But what did those large corporations, like you talked about the consulting companies, I mean, some of
Mhm.
those were billion-dollar businesses that you've worked for, right?
Yes.
So, and you were very successful. You've driven, more than double-digit growth while you've worked within those organizations. So that's not a low bar. That's a pretty big performing, sort of goal that you've been able to
Mhm.
hit. And I know those organizations are very competitive. I've been inside them as well. So there's also that you're dealing with. But what did those large corporates sort of teach you about what it really takes to lead at that level? And then, which is my secret part of this question, what I really want to see what you think because I've obviously got a perspective on this. But what did you know, sort of secretly, the unspoken piece that just wasn't working and just doesn't work in those organizations?
It's so interesting. Well, one thing I will say is I learned, I was very much an entrepreneur. And I learned that being right makes absolutely no difference. It's how you map the results or the impact you're promised to what you need as resourcing to be able to deliver it.
Right,
And very importantly, you can never underestimate the importance of the relationships you have with people.
right,
And so this is why I am a massive devotee to the book Leading Without Authority by Keith Ferrazzi. I recommend it all the time because that principle he absolutely nails in that book. And the second thing, which is really important and takes a lot of self reflection, is the excuses. He's got 6 excuses, and I promise you, we all fall into them. Some of them we fall into individually. We fall into more this bucket than that bucket. But if we're analyzing what our strengths and weaknesses are, the tendencies we have to make excuses for why things aren't moving forward, it is brilliant. So at the end of the day, large organizations, you're absolutely right, Belinda, and you've been in them too. You need to follow processes. You need to figure out how you make them work, how you simplify them so people actually use them. All of those kinds of things. It's fascinating because it is essentially a very large community of lots of people who can be your no sayers. So you're managing all of that, and you have the opportunity to see success for others. So I was at $28 billion media and communications company. My group in the media company was the only one who met their targets in the recession of 2007, 2008. And I still have the piece of paper somewhere because our SVP wrote up this summary of the year, and my group was the only one who did. And on top of that, we continued to scale and grow through that time. So it wasn't just targets that leveled, it was targets that excelled the growth. So the biggest thing through that is we had made ourselves so useful to our clients that even though they were struggling and some did have to pull back some, we were the go-to for when there were problems. And again, you have to keep your team. Your team
Right.
has to be ready to jump in. It's all relationship. And then also using their influence to make sure we were all going in the right direction and really supporting what we were delivering to our clients. And I kept track, and this is something that it's amazing to me, is not typically thought of in large organizations or small organizations. I let everybody have the credit of the revenue we generated. I
Right.
wanted it in their P&L because every time I called or someone from my team, they were making money. And so we supported them in their success, and they got to recognize that. I kept track of what that total was so that I could have, and I had all the charts mapped out of resourcing against that revenue that we were supporting through all the other business units. So there are so many ways to really align even the hard financials against the success that you actually want to deliver, as opposed to, playing the game the way that it's laid out.
Right. And you think that most big corporations get that wrong? They're too fixed in how they see that environment. And so there's a lot more placed on what you're told to do rather than what you think is the right way to go about achieving the goal.
Frequently, the wrong markers are used for measurement. If there's a larger pie to be built and you get a larger piece because you're part of that larger pie and it delivers success to the client you're supposed to be delivering success to, why wouldn't you
Yeah. No, true.
travel down that road?
So true.
People end up fighting over this territory because the structure is wrong.
Right.
You know,
Right.
you only get commissioned if you do this. Well, what about this?
Yeah. What about the broader stuff? Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the simple example, capping commissions.
Right.
Why would you cap commissions if you're looking at how you scale somebody? Readjusting them at year end, fair. but why would you cap?
Right. And they send the wrong messages. Yeah, I know. There's so many
Mhm.
different things we could spend days going through what corporate get wrong about growth. But so you've had interesting roles. So you've moved through market research, telecommunications, media, advertising. That's a lot of really different sort of industry skills. I mean, the people skills are always fundamental, but I think learning and stretching yourself across multiple industries is not easy. Was that deliberate, or did sort of the next thing sort of come and see you as being a shining star in the space you're in and sort of offered you an opportunity to see if you could replicate it somewhere else? Or were you the one really looking hungry to learn?
I am so hungry to learn always. Yeah. So that's definitely there. I will say also, my title of a DLS. So when you're figuring things out, I'd take a DLS over any other title any day. So that's a determined little shit is going to get something done, and I'll take that all day long. And I started out in a very bad market, and I did what they call now an informational interview. I literally went to the yellow pages, I went to the library, went to the yellow pages and said, I know you're not hiring now, but I was wondering if I could come in for to speak to whoever would be hiring at some point, just to learn more about the industry. And I got 3 job offers, and that's how I started out in my career. So, it's one of those things where hungry, hungry, hungry. Of course, I also wanted to move quickly. I didn't want to stay at $30,000 a year in benefits. I knew I wanted to do so much more. So I literally worked 18, 20 hours a day, and I took on a number of different jobs, really. And I loved it. And in fact, those are the companies that I worked for, but my clients have always been executive level decision makers in everything: public, private, not for profit, religious, government, political. I have worked across the board, and it is fascinating to me because, Belinda, everyone with any real experience knows there's all the things that are so different, and really there's very little. at the end of the day, if you're selling, this lipstick versus how I should vote on a certain day, there's the urgency of that certain day, no question. But regardless, it at the end of the day, it's the same thing. And so there's a lot that you can apply. And then there are those little nuances that are definitely different that are industry specific. So I'll frequently say I know enough to either be dangerous or a bit of a pain in the ass, just
and
about
and
any space.
successful in your own right. I think don't undersell yourself. So just speaking of that, because I'm just really interested. This next question I found really interesting when I found this out that I didn't know this about your background until I was researching you. But you were one of the first paid sponsors of C-Suite before you even joined the team, which to me is
Yeah.
really, really interesting that you are almost technically investing, well, not almost, you are technically investing in the group before you even sort of came into the group. What did you
Mhm.
see from the outside that made you go, yeah, I'm going to back this like so early in the game? Because that was really at the sort of beginnings of the whole concept.
It was really the beginning. And at that point, we had one event. And then it was two events a year, and so on. So my beginning days with that, what happened was I had met my business partner, our chairman and founder, Jeffrey Hazlett, at a conference. I was the treasurer of my national association. We brought him into keynote, and he was sharing his concept of what C-suite network might be. And it was not finalized. He's in the Speaker Hall of Fame. One of the things he does is he tests language. He tries to see engagement when he's got a large audience to see what do they like about this idea, what don't they like, and how would he describe why he's passionate about something
Right,
he's going to launch.
right.
And so he shared that about C-Suite Network. And for me, I was already using the term C-Suite. At that point, I was sending out thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of interviews a year for Rogers Media because I headed up all, research and insights for all of our B2B assets and much of our consumer. I mean, and at that point, Rogers owned all of those, at least half of all of those brands in every space. If you want to know about plastics manufacturers or pharmacists or, these are spaces I was in. And so I was already using the C-suite terminology, and I was speaking all over North America about the different ways we can be using real content with B2B audiences, consumer audiences, et cetera. So, but the B2B side, I'd spent a lot of time in. And so I reached out to Jeffrey when I took on the global CMO role at MDC Partners and headed up strategy and had P&L responsibilities for one of our companies as well. I reached out to Jeffrey and said, I need an American network. And so he had just started the company officially, and I came on board as the first paying sponsor. So that belief in having a place where you have vetted business leaders, and I know you know this, Belinda, when you're coming, especially when you're coming in from out of territory, it doesn't matter if it's city, state, country, continent. When you're coming in from out of territory, you need somebody that will help you that's already vetted
Yeah,
because there are a lot of people who will not serve your interests. And
yeah.
so you need to figure things out really darn quickly. If you're in business, you don't have time for everything that comes your way.
Well, and you
And
also don't have you know me, you'll laugh when I say this, but we're being we're being honest in this very,
Mhm.
like, what's the word? Very simple conversation that more than hopefully hundreds or thousands of people might watch. So it's not necessarily confidential, but you know me well enough, and I don't mind people knowing me.
Mhm.
Don't have a lot of patience. The older I've gotten in my career, so I have the patience of a gnat. So what's one of the things that if I'm in a room and I find that there's just, there's some groups of people that just don't want to listen, so to me
Mhm.
that's just a waste of time, because if you've got experience and you're trying to share it, what's the point of being in a room if people aren't interested? And so that's one of the things I do like about the group, that you spend a lot of time curating the groups. And so when you're right,
Mhm.
you don't have to spend that time thinking, well, am I in a room with a lot of people that just really are a waste of time or not? And I don't mean that
Mhm.
you're trying to sell it or whatever, but that they have a common interest, a common conversation piece.
And the ability to let down the guard and be real and be operating at a level where it's not intimidating, it's not untoward to say, hey, I've got these many businesses. I'm challenged with this one. I'm, just absolutely nailing it with this one. And I could use, what are your thoughts on this? And have that be, that's normal. That's Tuesday.
Right. And also
It's
being
what we
able
do.
to be open and just ask for help. There's a lot of people
Yeah.
that when you think about it, you don't have the experience and you need to have an environment where you can just be really trusting in a network to ask for help. So I know that's one of the really cool things that you guys do.
And steering away from fake fame. And there are real challenges as a business leader. You have to have a presence. On the other hand, there are so many wastes of time that are
Right.
just fake fame and what I would consider, I know you, Belinda, would consider complete nonsense because it doesn't actually help you move forward and see success. It actually wastes resources, wastes time, and plays to ego instead of the actual success of whatever the business is or the pursuit of that particular
Yeah, for
individual.
sure. I call those things vanity projects, and there's lots of them. People think marketing just I need to get content out there. No, you don't. You
Yeah.
need to
Or
actually
they
have a
just want
really
the
good
stage.
business first and then talk about it. There's no point talking to the hand anyway. So you became an executive vice president when you came into the business first,
Hmm?
and you became the chief community officer, which I think you also still do today, just saying. You are always, in my view, you're always the cheerleader of the community, and now you're CEO. That's a really big
Mhm.
sort of journey arc through one organization. Did you see things change in you at each stage of those different roles? And sort of when did you know that the CEO role was something you could really step into, that you went, yep, I'm ready for this, I can step into this role? Was there a moment?
What a great question, Belinda. First, I will say absolutely. I have had massive change in my own um, capabilities, sight lines, and I know this will resonate with you. The gut, right? Your gut that says, "I know what this means and where I can take this, or what this looks like." And the CEO role, I wouldn't say there was one moment by any means. What I would say, and I still feel this in the everyday, is I can have impact to deliver against this brand promise. And the responsibility that I have to deliver that far outweighs any emotional connection I have to the position. So much so that I can't even begin to tell you how little so many things matter to me that might have mattered to me when I was younger. I am now entirely in that mission driven spot where nonsense is non existent. I've got too many important things to do. And I know that I can do them. So it's navigating that to get it done. And so yeah, so I wouldn't say there was one moment of now I know I'm ready for this. It was just I've got a job to do and I can deliver on this, and every day I can. And the day, and I've said this before, the day that I don't feel I can, that's the day I am out because and this is something I was thinking about recently, Belinda, is when you don't care anymore, and this is for anybody listening, and we all know this is true, but just to say it out loud, when you don't care anymore, it is time to leave. The other person isn't the asshole, you are. And so, or the other group or the other team or
Right.
whatever.
It's no one else's
If
fault. Yeah.
that is when the switch flips
Right.
and it's time for you to leave.
Yeah,
Or it
I
was
think
already.
that's really true. I mean, it's true, isn't it, in a
Mhm.
relationship, in anything, when you really have just checked out in your head, what's the point of staying? So
Mhm.
when you get into doing what we do, and we've been in been in startups, multiple times, but this is also, obviously starting a business group is a very challenging thing to do, which is what you signed up to do with Jeff. So this podcast is all about what it takes. And I know you've talked about gut, you've talked about, resilience, we've talked about that ability to just show up. So in some respects, it's really the obsession of what you need to focus on. You need to have that built in, I think. But there's also
Mhm.
fear. There's lots of things that you know, uh, create the momentum, if you like, to sort of really know that, and particularly in startups, you've got to have it to know when you've got to pivot, you've got to change with market conditions or anything that happens. So, did you have have a pivot in your career that forced you to think about things completely differently, and what you were doing, where you were heading? Was there a moment earlier in your career, or even recently, where you've sort of gone, actually, I was heading left, I really need to reposition and head right? Was there a moment that you felt, is that something you can articulate or you can think of that might have got you where you are now?
Well, I will say again that when you're mission driven and you're aligning the values of your team and who you're delivering to, why you're delivering, what it is you're delivering, and how that will, how the world will change, what's the vision, it makes everything so much easier. And, as you were saying, that dedication, that relentlessness, I do not think it is ridiculous to say that probably most of us have some form of diagnosed or undiagnosed OCD, ADHD, because you do have to obsess. It's not like you get to just shut it off and walk away. There's a different dynamic, and this is why between being an entrepreneur and building a business and having ownership, where again, if you haven't worried about how you're making payroll next week, you have not been a real entrepreneur. That is an absolute truth. And just the way life is today, there's no such thing to me as balance. I think that's an artificial sales job. It's focus and it's integration, but I don't believe in balance. And that's something that I've been navigating to create conversation around it with the people I support, because lots of people who've never been there and done it will talk about balance. And I understand there's a physiological description
Right.
of balance. That's true. I get it. But in our lives, integration and what those conditions of satisfaction are, to make sure that no matter how crazy the day is, you're still getting those things that make it meaningful included, even if it's the tiniest thing,
Yeah.
is absolutely critical. And that whole sense of conditions of satisfaction, that was something that Jeffrey introduced me to years ago, where, what are the conditions of satisfaction? And when you think about that in your life, and so I apply it to my life. What are the three things I must get done every day that I feel like a human? And it's great,
Right.
and I can do those no matter where I am, no matter who I'm with,
Right.
no matter what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So
Super important. And I
mhm.
was interviewing someone the other day, and we were talking about, it's interesting that you've had the ice skating thing, because obviously I've had surfing in my background, and
Mhm.
sort of talking about that sort of pivot moments or that sort of obsession. It's like in surfing, when you're learning and when you're improving, you fall off all the time. So you fall off, you've got to get back on the board to get better. And you've used ice skating as an example. I think it's an amazing parallel, really, that you're going to fall over when you go out on the ice and you're practicing, but you do it anyway. And it's a bit like,
Yes.
from a startup CEO perspective, you need to understand that you're going to pivot multiple times. I say to people that I'm mentoring, younger people, that hey, you made a mistake. You're not dead. Like, you can get up
Well,
and you can start again next week. You don't have to
and
be so stressed about that something has failed. In a startup, stuff's going to fail all the time.
Belinda, I couldn't agree with you more. And to the point where it's like, how do you think anybody gets good at anything? And
Right,
and it's not failure,
right.
it's learning.
I know.
Literally, it's learning.
I know.
To me, failure is when you fall and you have an important mission to deliver on and you don't bother to get back up again.
Right,
That's failure.
right.
Otherwise, it's learning and apply it. During COVID, so this was the major pivot of C-suite network. During COVID, everybody was in crisis. Even if it wildly propelled your company, you were in crisis, because now you have supply chain issues, staffing issues. I mean, it was just unbelievable to have everybody in the same crisis at the same time. So I kept saying, and I started this model. We actually drew a graph of it since, but at the time, just on the spot, like, okay, we have to go up. We've got to grow, grow, grow. We got to do whatever we're going to do. We're going to move quickly and upward. We're not burying ourselves. So we're going to go upward. So we're going to have to innovate, innovate, innovate. What does the world look like today? What do we need to do to achieve success? How do we serve our people? How do we deliver on our promise and stay alive? This is major crisis. So what we need to do is we need to innovate, innovate, innovate. That's going to pull up, right? And then what we have to decide is what works, what doesn't work. What works, the operational team fills in and makes it work, right? Actually operationalizes it. And then whatever doesn't work, we drop it. It's not a failure. We learned quickly. Let's
Right.
keep going. So what works, we keep filling in. What doesn't work, we drop it. We can come back. We got learnings. It might work later for totally different reasons. It just doesn't work right now. And we know that now. So let's keep moving.
Yeah, I know. It's funny, isn't it? Lots of people get freaked out about failure, but you just touched on COVID there. So,
Mm.
Jeff, who's the chairman and your founder, he's mentioned that during COVID, you really were the person that basically kept the lights on of the organisation, which is a pretty remarkable thing to say to one person. But to me, I'm not surprised because I think your human connection skills would reach through any technology. I don't think they're dependent on people being in the same room with you. But what was that time like for you? So, with so much going on and you being removed from something that, clearly feeds you, that energy of being around other people and learning from them and being part of that whole human state, you know, what kept you sort of going when the logic and really the influence, if you think about it, to your point, everyone was in crisis. It was a very strange time in the history of the world because we didn't really know what was going to happen, but you
Mhm.
kept going. Like, what stopped you walking away?
Well, I will say, first and foremost, it absolutely wasn't me alone. It was incredible how we all wrapped around each other. So that is incredibly complimentary, and I'm grateful for that. But it was a whole massive team effort, and starting with Jeffrey, March 13th happened. March 16th, everything shut down in the States, and on March 16th, we'd already had several meetings, and we had a press release ready to go. And Jeffrey said, listen, we're not healthcare first responders, but we are business first responders, and we will not back down. We will be here for this community. And I wholeheartedly supported that. And it was probably the most challenging, well, I won't say probably, it was by far the most challenging time in our business. And I will say for me, business life, because it was literally an 18-hour a day commitment to be able to deliver everything we had promised, but now virtual.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the needs were so much greater. So we quintupled what we were delivering. I literally damaged my throat speaking because
That's
I was
funny.
on Zoom
I can
18 hours a
imagine.
day.
And the
It
need
was
the need for human connection was so extraordinary
yes.
during that.
And we could deliver it. And I will say we're now 6 years past that time, and the relationships and the extension of trust, the tagline of C-Suite Network, ironically, since the very beginning, the most trusted network. That trust and the relationships in C-Suite Network are all an extension of that. When somebody's not going to just abandon you,
Yeah.
and because they're suffering or they're going through challenges,
Right.
but we'll be there.
Right.
And it's not that everybody understands, there's not unicorns and rainbows and all that kind of thing. But the real core of that and the relationship building and solidification, I have no doubt that that is in all of the relationships, even if I've just met somebody a month ago. It's an extension that keeps going, and
Yeah.
and I think invaluable in the heart of a community.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you can feel it certainly in the groups that you're part of. So that brings us to an interesting question. I know we've spoken about this a lot. And actually, it was when the original frame of the business that is now We Group Global, I think when I was leading that is when I first met you and we were focused on female um, issues and certainly women in business. So you've been very vocal about that, particularly for women at an executive level. When you've often explained it as being nose to the grindstone, working like a maniac, and pretty much because you have to, especially if you've got kids or you've got elderly parents, or women have so many different caregiver roles. Was there a moment where you hit the wall, where the system pushed back so hard that you genuinely had to decide whether you could keep going in the sort of C-level roles that you've had?
Do you know, no. It's so interesting, Belinda, and I hear people. There are different things that happen early on in my career because I was the youngest executive in a $1 billion company, North America wide.
Right.
As a vice president at 31, and so I went through a stage where people would say, "Oh my goodness, you look like a woman. That's amazing." And I'm like, "Well,
What does that
I
mean?
am a
Isn't that
woman, you
funny?
know." Yeah. And
Yeah.
and I had I gave birth to two children, and so I did that. Um so it's fascinating to me now. I get, "Oh my goodness, you're so real." When people are with me in person, and you know this,
Mm,
Belinda, it's like, "Oh my goodness, you're a real person," and they think that because I have this title or I sit here,
right.
I'm gonna look down at other. I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I am just so inspired and excited about what makes all the people around me and that I get to be with amazing." It's the greatest vicarious living ever to be able to be part of the lives of incredible people that you admire and respect and appreciate and want to see succeed. So I've made different decisions. I had a stay at home husband for a number of years when I was, had roles where I had to be traveling every week. I still do. And I look at things a little differently in terms of those different roles and responsibilities. And so it's not that I don't accept them, but I definitely do look at them a little differently.
Yeah, I was
And
going to
and I'm
say
a
perspective is the thing that, I think a lot of women, and we've talked about this too, because
Mhm,
it doesn't matter whether you're male or female, to be the CEO of a startup, to be the CEO of anything, male, female, it's hard. It's not,
mhm,
so yes, the female thing can be a component of it, but I don't think it necessarily is a limiting force. But then, there are some compromising factors because just the statistics are you can't get in the room as easily as men just because there hasn't been enough of us yet. And there's a whole range of stuff we could go off on a tangent there. But I think,
mhm.
there's also two sides to your point. You've also had the perspective that where limitations were to climb over, a bit like my way of looking at
Yeah.
the world. If someone puts a gate in front of you, my mother used to say this to me as when I was a tiny child. She used to
Mhm,
say I was so different to my brother because she would be able to put my brother out on when we were just barely walking on a little blanket in the garden, and he'd sit and play with his toys. I'd get up and
mhm,
crawl and be halfway over the front fence. Like I was
mhm.
not sitting waiting for a toy. I'm like, you know what? There's a gate. I think I can get over that. And I think to this
Yes.
point, this stage of my life, I'm still sort of looking for the gate to climb over, which you have to have from a startup perspective. If you don't have that perspective, which yeah,
Yeah.
is similar.
I think the I think the other thing, and especially when we look at women and how we support each other, there's not one way. And so when you hear another woman's story, how you can assimilate, there's a piece there that makes sense for me, and there's another piece not for me, but I'm grateful that that works for that person.
Right.
And so that kind of sharing, I frequently will say I'm third generation crazy woman. My grandmother started her own business. Unfortunately, she died too young for me to learn from her business experience, but my mother is a global leader in her space to this day. And then there's me, and so I say to my children, I'm sorry, but you're by extension fourth generation crazy, and that's
Right.
the way it's going to be. And whatever they decide to do,
I'm sure they'll be fine. I'm sure.
yeah. But how do we empower each other to see the opportunity in what we've experienced and what we're trying to do or trying to accomplish? And empowerment, I think, is a topic that is just not really addressed. Everything's this constant disempowerment that that's the principle that I am most armed around in terms of how we actually help each other succeed. And by that, all people, I'll never forget my first presentation after giving birth to my first daughter. I had to fly to the Bank of New York in New York, and I presented in their tower. And somebody walked up to me at a certain point, no recollection of who it was, but the feeling and the experience, I absolutely remember it to the day I die. And they said, "I heard you have a 4-month-old. Oh, you must really miss her." And I suddenly realized, oh my goodness, they're asking me to put all of the shit of guilt and a horrendous feeling and being torn and all that stuff into like a backpack of 1,000 pounds and throw it on my back and go, oh. And I remember very conscientiously, it was like those slow motion moments
Yep.
where you just say, no, thank you. That's yours. I slept very well last night.
Right. Right.
Which, when you have a 4-month-old, is not necessarily going to happen when you're sleeping at home. So there are, I think there are those things where we can normalize different experiences, different opportunities, and ways to be empowered. With my daughters, I share very openly, this is my mission, this is my passion, this is what I am super excited to deliver. I don't know what yours are going to be. You're going to have to figure that out, but oh my goodness, I'm so excited for you. And I'm so excited to kind of be watching.
Right.
I'm
And more importantly, the skills of resilience and, climbing over gates. I think they're the things that are valuable, whether you're female or male. So that
Yes.
brings us to sort of what you've termed a great term, I think, which is the hero factor, that you think is really central to everything, certainly that you build. So, which is what we touched on earlier. So measuring success beyond the numbers, if you like. So leading with integrity, giving back, etc. In your experience, what is the single biggest barrier that stops otherwise people that you would, probably assess are excellent leaders from becoming what you call hero leaders?
So, first, I will say the hero factor is based on the book Hero Factor by Jeffrey Hazlitt. So, if anybody's looking for another book, another great book to read, that will be the Hero Factor. And I have owned that brand promise for almost 10 years now because I am the general manager of the Hero Club. And this is very near and dear to my heart. And Belinda, I'm thrilled you're a hero leader. It is business leaders who have pledged to lead with integrity, transparency, give back to their communities, share in their success. If I were to say, first of all, I'd say we believe that most business leaders, whether they understand it or not, really do sit in that camp because most of us are doing everything we can to make sure we are paying other people before we pay ourselves. We're delivering and volunteering and supporting our teams in volunteering, and we're donating to associations, organizations, our communities, etc. And that story doesn't get told very often, which the original founder of Hero Club, Rob Bryan, he is the one who sold us the Hero Club for $1. And it was because we could support at a larger scale business leaders who'd made that promise. And two, which is very, very important, is get the message out about what most of us are actually doing as business leaders. Not the greed and ugliness that you see in the news frequently, but what we're actually trying to do. So I think if I were to say people who get caught, who want to be a hero leader, but get caught and aren't quite able to deliver on it, for that group, I'd say it's just the cynicism. There's no one more taken advantage of than a business decision maker. And so oftentimes it's very tempting to, build that thick skin of cynicism and
Right.
say, well, I know you're not really going to serve my needs, or I can give and give and give and you'll
Right.
never appreciate it. Or, I went on a limb and I hired that person and they didn't, they took advantage of it. So I'm never hiring, those kinds of things can be very challenging. And that is why a community like the Hero Club is so important, because we know that can happen and we courageously decide to make the decision that we know is the right one to make, maybe a little better informed
Right.
with a little more support.
Right.
But we're going to do that because we want to be able to deliver that kind of success and support and belief in the people that we are invested in, and that sets an example.
So you're actually, so if you sort of stretch that concept for what you call the Hero Club, that's part of the C-suite network, you're essentially selecting, members, if you like, based on their character as much as their credentials. As I know they have to have achieved a certain level of business acumen to be in that group. But what
Mhm.
are you actually looking for in someone? And is there something that disqualifies a person no matter how much their title or track record impresses the general population?
1000%, yes. So you have to be nominated to the Hero Club. You have to be able to be in that space where you're putting others first, where you can take the armor off and be real. You can't be sitting in the room selling, because that's about you. It's how you're serving, and being real about that. Absolutely, there are very strict rules around what that looks like, and it's so important because we want to be able to be real in that room, and there's some people who just can't do that. It doesn't mean they're a bad person,
Right.
or that they, I actually had someone who had a lot of issues at one point, and I was able to give them three of our consultants who do amazing work with a particular challenge that person had.
Well, that's great.
It isn't like, oh, you're not good enough to be here. It's just you may not be in the headspace or it just may not be the right fit right now. Even if the commitment is there. And so with C Suite Network, because we're such an enormous ecosystem with hundreds of thousands of business decision makers in our database, and obviously we're meeting thousands of people a month with all of our different events and speaking engagements and so on. It's that place where you can be safe, that you're with values-based leaders, and you're not going to have someone, after you've said, I'm really challenged with this, I could use some help, walk up to you and say, well, for $50,000, I could do this for you. It's more, I love this analogy. If your child, your sibling, or your parent came to you and said, I just started a business, you wouldn't launch into selling them your product or service. You would say, oh my goodness, that's incredible, tell me more about it. Right? You'd listen, and then you'd say, oh my goodness, well, do you need help with anything? And if you do need help, I know people who will take care of you. I know people that won't take advantage of you. They'll make sure you are served to your success, to your ends. And that's what that's about. And then there are so many other ways that we need to be served as business leaders. So there are many other communities within C-Suite Network so that you can be getting support in different ways, and different industries, different firmographics, issues related, etc. So there are lots of different conversations and support and communities across the whole of C-Suite Network as well.
Which is awesome. So you've sat on boards, and I know you sit on some now, and different associations and not-for-profits. How do you decide where to give your time, and what do those commitments add to how you lead at C-Suite Network?
What a great question, Belinda. It's one of those things where you do have to be incredibly mindful to where your time is going and how it's being used. Um, one of the boards that I sit on is Broadway Hearts, and that choice was an easy one for me. They are on an incredible mission to deliver the experience of Broadway to children in hospitals.
So
And
cool.
it is absolutely incredible, and there's scientific proof, and literally every board meeting there are tears because it's just incredible the work that's being done. And um, the way that whole team shows up for C-Suite Network as part of our community is also just incredible. So when we have holiday parties, they come in and perform. And so for me, when I was asked to sit on the board, how could I not? It's just a beautiful thing. Of course, I love the theater and artistic expression, and how we monetize artistic expression and create sustainable business models is another whole thing that I am a massive believer in. Anybody who says creatives can't be in business is ignoring the fact that they have to be.
Yeah.
And that's probably a whole other podcast, Belinda. But so for me, that's just been incredibly fulfilling. There's a set amount of time. I know I can deliver on it, and kindly they've set up a time where I can make those meetings, and I'm able to deliver something that I know also is a diverse skill set from the other board leaders who are also incredible and doing all kinds of amazing things that we need in the board. So I'm very grateful for that. So going forward, in terms of board positions, what I'm looking at now is board positions that would help me move the needle with that organization and C-Suite Network. So, a a public board, a board that has some meaningful connection to how I'm delivering as the CEO of C-suite and the other businesses that I have. That would be where I would focus going forward in terms of what I need to do. And then, of course, how can you not support your friends? So that's not an easy one for me to answer, Belinda.
Okay, it sounds to me like you're stretching yourself very
Yeah.
wide, but that doesn't surprise me either. So that's sort of
It's a matter of being clear on the
I
expectations. I
know.
don't want to promise and not be able to deliver. So that's where the bottom line, ends up falling.
I know. So that sort of brings us to the next question, actually, because of course you can't do this if you're trying to be perfect in every thing that you do. So, and the way that you explain it is you say there are no points, or we say in Australia, no brownie points for perfection. That and when you're creating success, perfection is, and certainly I agree with this 100%, actually useless, which
Mhm.
runs hard against how not only conventional industry rewards people, but how they talk about people's achievements, which, from my view of leading teams, just set people up for enormous amounts of disappointment because it's impossible to be at the top of your game every single minute of every single day. So, how do you lead a high performance organization while sort of generally living the belief that perfection's useless?
That's an incredible question. I don't believe in perfection. There is just absolutely no measure of perfection. Even if you somehow said, okay, this was perfect, the markers change and that's no longer perfect. And so even if you could say in one state, this was perfection in figure skating for scoring, perfection in the 60s, night and day different from perfection today in figure skating, let alone 10 years ago. So that to me, I agree 1,000% is absolutely not important. I usually say, instead of the brownie points, I'll say getting A's in school does not mean you have a successful business. It to your point, it runs counterintuitive. The biggest thing is how do we drive the results we want to have and then backtrack to make it even better in terms of the process of getting there. And then I've always used the analogy of a Rubik's cube. You get one side right and then you have to completely mess it up to try to get the second side right, and so on. And then what do you do as soon as you have all of the sides? You break it apart or you mix it up, and the next thing you know, you're starting over again. So I think it's really critical. And the only thing that's healthy for your own headset is to understand it's a constant moving target and you're ultimately delivering a result, sometimes way more painfully than you'd like it to be.
Right.
But then you have the opportunity to bring that in. The other thing I think is absolutely critical and frequently overlooked is you are not alone. I just gave a testimonial for one of our leaders in our faculty, and I actually pulled up the text for the testimonial, and I said you are a world changer. And I said, and remember, you are never alone. We're here with you. And the fact of the matter is, anyone who's aligned on your mission or your success and what you're trying to deliver is part of your team. So you don't need to carry that mantle. I can also say, Belinda, when people want to tell me all the things that are wrong, I will frequently I listen and listen. Thank you so much. And if I'm feeling a little bit cheeky, I'll say I have about 1,000 more that I could add to the list. Because I've been at this longer. But I really appreciate that input and feedback. It's something I can be working on, and so on. So, and then you keep going. It's the equivalent of our example of falling off the surfboard, falling on the ice.
Right.
Okay, great, not perfect, but we're going to move it forward.
We'll get better and we'll just keep going. So, just to close out that thought, what's the hardest leadership decision you've ever made, and what did it cost you?
Hardest leadership decision is having to let someone go from the team. Always, always. I mean, financials are financials. Nothing fun about that when it's not positive. But the people part of it always the hardest because even if without a doubt it is the right decision to make, it's still affecting people's lives. And I would put that in the same category that if you don't feel that anymore, you need to be moving to something else because that's part of being human.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And that's
Hmm.
part of building and
Hmm.
growing teams. Sometimes you just have to. I hear you, but it's never easy. So
No.
you host your own podcast, which is the C-Suite Success with Tricia Benn, where you dig into how today's most successful leaders actually define success, which is a really interesting sort of I guess look at how people are working in different environments, particularly today with the technology. After all those conversations, what's the interview and the question that surprised you the most? So the one that made you rethink something that you thought you
It's
might already know.
It was one of the very first ones I ever did, which just sets the
That's
tone for the
cool.
whole podcast. Yes. And so it's called C-Suite Success because I want the excuse for the conversation to remind all of us that, to your point earlier, there is no such thing as perfection. There is no one success. As I said earlier, there's no one path of how to be a great business leader or a great woman business leader, etc. We need and we get to carve that out for ourselves. So the definitions of success have been multitudes. If you multiply each person by how many measures of success, I'm already at thousands and thousands with nearly 100 interviews. It's so exciting, and I think it's just such a great reminder that success is what we define it as being, and then we get to deliver on it. It's the greatest thing ever in terms of core empowerment. And the biggest surprise I had was with a gentleman who literally looks like The Rock, and he was the owner of the largest independently owned gym studios in America.
All right.
And I asked him, as I do in every interview, one way or another, I ask, what are you excited about that you're learning today? And again, I get as many different answers as people and then some. And with him, without taking a breath, I'm looking at The Rock and he says, I'm learning how to be a 16-year-old girl.
Okay, that
I
could go a couple of different ways.
I know, Belinda. I almost fell over. I almost fell over. He is incredible. And what he was pointing out is in order to be the best possible coach and facilitator of this incredible 16-year-old fighter
Right.
who happened to be female,
Right.
he could not try to make her him. He needed to help her be more her. He needed to support her in being the greatest her. And I mean,
That's
what a
great. I
powerful
know.
lesson.
Yeah. Great. Well, that's cool.
Mhm.
I've never had someone looking like the Hulk talk to me about that, and I would have probably collapsed if they'd have given that answer too.
I had to like lift my jaw back up off the floor. It was the most beautiful, surprising answer
That's
I could
hilarious. Well, hilarious, but
imagine.
also awesome at the same time. Well, it's been
Yes.
so great chatting to you. We always end our podcasts with what we call our rapid fire full tilt finish, and that is 5 questions that we ask leaders and startup founders. You ready for these?
Okay, I'm
I
ready.
think you should be ready. So, the one leader outside of anyone you've worked with directly who you genuinely admire and why?
I always love to bring these questions close to home. I know people will say all kinds of famous names, people they've never met or they met once or they, whatever. For me, I'm going to answer with my mother and my grandmother. So I never worked directly with my mom. I never worked directly with my grandmother, but my mom really helped me understand the people side of things in work, and I learned from a very young age how to walk into a building that she ran and respect and appreciate everybody in that building, and um and what it meant to really value everybody on the team and so on. So that for my mother. My grandmother told me a woman should always have $20 in her purse. And another time, I'll tell you why that because becomes so much more valuable over time. But my grandmother taught me a lot about people and also um, that we do not. And my grandmother, my mother, that's another part of the 3 generations of crazy women. We do not have to be perfect to mean everything and have massive impact in the people in our lives and the people that matter to us, the people we're dedicated to serving. So this again, that notion of perfection only harms because at the end of the day, you can have massive impact in massive imperfection. So there we go.
Well, none of those women, including yourself, sound crazy to me. They sound very cool. I wish I would meet them all in one go. I think all of you in one room would have been an extraordinary experience. So I know where you're probably going to go with this one then too. Best piece of advice you've ever received, and who gave it to you?
Oh, that $20. Okay, so then now that gives me time to answer that question.
Okay.
So early on, so when I was a child, my grandmother used to say always, a young woman should always have $20 in her purse. And my parents were students, and $20 when I was a kid was a lot of money. And because my mother was a veterinarian, she knew all the science of nutrition. So I was allowed no candy. So when I was a child, my grandmother giving me $20 was an enormous amount of money. And I could spend it on anything I wanted. So I got lots of candy and stuff that probably wasn't very healthy for me, but it was the only time that I was allowed to do that. And my mother allowed it. So it was like the rules can be broken when my grandmother had something to do with it. So very rewarding having $20 in my purse. But then later on through my life, it became so much more meaningful. And she died when I was 12. So I didn't know these parts of this rule or principle. And when I was a young woman and, moving through my career, I was invited by a client to a football game where there was box seating and so on. Partway through the night, I realized I was a setup for a married, much older politician. And I had my $20 in my purse. And in those days, I was able to get a taxi. I had enough
Right.
money that I could get out of that situation. Now, I was never invited back to the box, nor did I want to
Good
be.
reason not to be invited back.
But it was safety. It meant that I had my independence.
Right.
So an incredible and I've been so blessed with so many incredible people around me. But that's a great example to share in this context.
Perfect. So what's the one thing, getting back to business, what's the one thing that keeps you up at night as a leader of a community at scale?
The thing that keeps me up at night is financial models of sustainability to not only support C-suite network and the brand promise we have, but support everyone that is partnered with us and leading with us, etc. So that, and there's never enough time. So if I could invent another 20 hours in a day, that would be lovely. Or a telecommuting, what do you call it? What do you call that? Transport, or, so we could
Yes, I
like
know what you mean.
transport.
I want one of those as
Yeah.
well, but I'd also like a device that can manufacture 5 or 6 of me, but then my team go, "Oh my God, the world's not ready for 5 or 6 of you."
I
So
know.
no, that's not a
Exactly.
thing.
But imagine if you could just push a button, Belinda, and you'd
I
be,
know.
Bali to New York.
I
It'd be perfect.
know. I
Or
know.
Chicago.
I know. Or Chicago, where I am right now.
Yeah.
I know. So
Yeah.
speaking of which, given that I feel like I'm living at full tilt, well, I do. My team say I live at full tilt. So do my family all the time. But what does that mean for you, living at full tilt?
Full tilt is being smart enough to understand there are things to be afraid of, right? There are things that we have to be mindful of, mitigate risk, etc., and taking that step in and going all out for it. And
Anyway.
that yeah, going at it anyway. And it's like saying, I know there are 1,000 things that could kill me. Oh well,
Right.
you want to add 5 to the list, it doesn't
Right.
really matter. I'm headed straight in, and I'm going to deliver on this promise, and I'm going to wrap around everybody who's aligned, and I want to be part of delivering on their promise. And to me, that's the going full out. And it's not being all joking aside, it's not being dumb enough not to understand. It's being smart enough to understand and doing it anyway. And
Right.
so I think we've used the analogy before. It's like, I'm going to run off the cliff, so have something there for me. It might be
I'll wave
a
a flag
trampoline.
when one foot's going over the side.
Yeah,
I'll
something,
raise
it might be like a bridge. It might
Yeah.
be, some kind of parasailing thing.
Yeah.
I don't, something, but please don't let me die. Don't let me fall to the bottom.
I won't let you die, don't worry. So what's the next chapter for you? What are you building towards that the world doesn't know yet?
Oh my goodness. Well, let's see. I have I mentioned about being excited about building and learning new things always. So being involved in other businesses and being able to support scaling and growth and seeing those things through, and also how that benefits the community, etc. That's where I'm really focused. And you know very well, Belinda, getting into the capital raise space and investment space. I'm very excited about what that looks like. Also, there's just so many great initiatives that are happening all across C suite. So, I'm involved, as you well know, with the Women's Wealth Symposium, and they give out a purple diamond as their big award. And it's also used on the tables for decoration, and it's used for thank you gifts. And so I have one of those purple diamonds right over here on my shelf. And so what you're going to see from me, I am excited to be able to say, is just raising. You know, I am at a stage where I want to just see just that incredible elevation and the celebration and the gratitude, people showing up in their power, that we are showcasing each other and seeing, that incredible success. So lots and lots, lots and lots to come.
Well, it's super exciting watching you shine. Even just in the short time I've known you, in what an extraordinary life you've lived so far, and I've known you for about 2 years, and you just one of those people whose energy I just love to see. What is it, the next thing that you're doing? And every time we speak, I know we end up talking for way longer than we've scheduled to talk. But so hey,
Thank
thank
you,
you
Belinda.
so much for your time today. I hope, and I'm pretty sure many of those people listening would have gotten an enormous amount of the energy and enthusiasm I get from hearing you speak every time I get the pleasure of seeing you or being with you. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy diary.
Thank you so much, Belinda. This is wonderful.